On behalf of the club's board of directors, I have asked Neil to tell us a bit about Dan and Nancy in order to better understand the extraordinary contributions that this couple have made on behalf of the citizens of Seattle, contributions that warrant honorary membership in Seattle 4. After explaining their achievements, Neil will introduce Dan as our featured speaker for today. Neil?
Let's welcome to the podium for the thoughts about the 2010 campaign our honorary new Rotarian, Dan Evans.
Well, speaking on behalf of both Nancy and me, it's a thrill to be an honorary member of Rotary. I hope that that doesn't require weekly attendance and makeups, but and I can't think of a more distinguished Rotary club in the world, and I've attended Rotary meetings around the world, than this one of Seattle Rotary. It was almost 50 years ago that I gave my first speech to Seattle Rotary, and I've looked back over the years and still have the transcripts of many of those speeches. But I do know that Rotary does not really get involved into partisan politics, so the fact that I'm talking on why I'm a Republican may puzzle you somewhat. But today people are asking, what the heck is a Republican anyhow? So this is not a political message, it is an educational treatise. Or some may even call it a sermon. So let me begin with a little history. I'm still a Republican because it is too darn difficult to remove the elephant tattoo from my fanny. But one of my earliest memories is of helping my mother prepare for a neighborhood party in November of 1932. She invited the neighbors in to listen to the radio broadcast of the presidential election returns. It was to be a celebration of Herbert Hoover's victory over Franklin Roosevelt. Well, the party ended early. And my parents waited 20 years to celebrate Dwight Eisenhower's election in 1952. But I admired my parents, and I figured anyone that loyal deserved support. Genetically, I am a Republican. But I recently reread an early campaign brochure from my 1964 campaign for governor, in which I stated 3 principles of my philosophy of government. Looking back on them, they're short and simple. I suppose some would say even simplistic, but they still guide me. I first said a belief in individual freedom, not only the freedoms of the Bill of Rights, but the freedom for each person to progress to the best of his capabilities, the freedom from stifling governmental regulation, a freedom for each citizen to walk on his own 2 feet and be the creator of his own destiny. 2, the preservation of local self-government. Local problems should be settled at the local level by local people dealing with their local representatives. Just as surely as we let the power of government drift, whether by design or neglect, from the local level to Olympia and from Olympia to Washington, D.C., so will we lose those individual freedoms which we all cherish. And 3, fiscal integrity. A firm belief that we have a responsibility to future generations to see that they are not saddled with a debt for services which we enjoy, but for which we did not have the courage to pay. That was 1964. 20 years later, while serving in the United States Senate, I regularly met with organized breakfast groups of national political reporters and columnists, and there were several of these distinguished groups. You went for breakfast, You had one bite, they asked the first question, and you were on the hot seat for the rest of it. In the middle of one of these meetings, a columnist asked, "What do you believe as a Republican?" Well, it was not a question I expected, but I responded ad lib. The next day, Lars Erik Nelson, a columnist with the New York Daily News, wrote a column which began, "My fellow Americans, it is with heavy heart and feelings of horror that I must report to you that I have personally heard in your nation's capital the advocacy of a political philosophy that has no place, son, I say no place, in this great land of ours. What is more, I heard it from the lips of a highly respected member of the United States Senate, Daniel J. Evans, a Republican from Washington State. He said, 'Frankly, my own view of republicanism is of government as a partner of the people rather than as an enemy of the people. I believe strongly in the federal nature of our system, with added strengths and abilities for states and local communities, trust between the various levels of government, and trust of government by the people themselves. I am a fundamentalist on the Constitution.' In an aside, Nelson said Evans opposes the proposed balanced budget amendment. I believe that internationally free and open trade, developing and broadening our relationship with other nations, is a road not only to economic health, but to international peace as well. Domestically, some of the areas where we need to pay attention are in areas where some people have not yet been able to share in the great wealth of this nation. I believe in the necessity of protecting our physical and human environment, particularly the physical environment that will give our children a chance to see what it was like before humans even came to parts of this country. In other words, preserving some of our natural areas and also preserving our human heritage. I would put nuclear war as the ultimate environmental concern. Those are the things I believe." Nelson continued, "What is so bizarre about Evans' philosophy is not its content. It is that it is a political orphan. There is little doubt that many, maybe even most Americans would embrace Evans' brief and heartfelt credo, and there is equally little doubt that none of the potential presidential candidates to succeed Ronald Reagan, either Democrat or Republican, would get to first base by espousing it." He went on in his column, and after bewailing the stridency of political extremism, Nelson wrote, "But the truth is not found by adding right-wing lunacy to left-wing idiocy and dividing by two." Amen. He ended by saying, "There are many in our nation's capital who realize the absurdity of this forced splitting of the country into extremes. There are many well-rounded politicians who eloquently could complain about being forced into square philosophical boxes in which they do not really believe. They may even be a majority, but the sad thing is that, like Dan Evans, they all feel alone." Well, I don't feel lonely, but I do miss the giants of our past. Our party has a long and rich political history. Born in the tumultuous prelude of the Civil War, the Republican Party, in its first platform, not only spoke forcefully against slavery, but advocated that the federal government sponsor a transcontinental railroad and that Congress invest in rivers and harbors to knit a continental nation together. The Republican Party is the party of Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, Dwight Eisenhower, and Ronald Reagan. Lincoln fought to preserve the Union and freed our slaves. Teddy Roosevelt was our first environmental president and authorized regulation on business excesses. Eisenhower developed respect abroad and strength at home, began the interstate highway network, and warned of the growing power of a military-industrial complex. Reagan advocated an international free trade system and built American industrial and military strength to end the Cold War. These are our Republican heroes, and their leadership could guide us today. Well, that's history. But what about today? The Tea Party movement captures today's political headlines. Their zealous advocates swamp the political establishment and nominate newcomers who support their anger. I share their concern over political gridlock, unsustainable spending, and patronizing federal government, but not their raw and virulent tactics. Their chosen name honors our revolutionary protesters who dumped boxes of English tea into Boston Harbor to protest taxation. But today's anti-tax enthusiasts forget history. Our colonial ancestors were not protesting taxation. They were protesting taxation without representation. There is a huge difference between protesting and governing, and a lasting political philosophy should focus on how to govern. You know, I'm tired of hyphenated republicanism. Moderate, conservative, mainstream are all adjectives which divide us. I frequently have people tell me, I'm a Dan Evans Republican. Well, there are even a few who whisper to me, I'm a Dan Evans Democrat. While that may be flattering, it's also divisive. I am just a Republican, and here is why. Conservation. You know, conservative and conservation come from the same word root, and it's a good place for Republicans to start expressing their conservatism. Conserving the use of our natural resources, protecting unique and rare lands, building a sustainable economy and a lifestyle should be fundamental concepts of a true conservative. We occupy space on this planet for a limited time and should leave to the next generation a legacy of freedom, opportunity, and resources that are better than we received. We ought to follow the hiker's creed, leave your campsite better than you found it. And the Constitution. I'm a fundamentalist regarding the Constitution, so what does that mean? Well, a powerful Constitution accomplishes two goals: establishing the structure of government and protecting and expanding our freedoms. Our Constitution has succeeded well because it has been amended so rarely. In our more than 200-year history, we found it necessary to modify our governmental structure only 7 times, and we have expanded our freedoms 18 times. The 10 amendments of the Bill of Rights sings to us our freedoms, and we later abolished slavery, expanded the right to vote to former slaves, to women, to 18-year-olds, and only once have we attempted to regulate social behavior through the prohibition of the use of alcohol for beverages. 14 years later, we realized our mistake and repealed the amendment. But in recent years, and during the time I was in the Senate, we faced amendments to allow prayer in schools, require a balanced federal budget, establish political office term limits, ban burning the American flag, and prohibiting abortion. But our Constitution is strong because it is amended rarely and then to expand freedoms, not restrict them. The balanced budget amendment is an impractical idea that is meaningless until we decide how to keep even a national standard set of books so we know how to measure balance. The interpretation of that amendment would turn over fiscal decision-making to the Supreme Court for years. And as a voter, I'm outraged by those sanctimonious term limiters who would steal from me the freedom of my vote. What's wrong with trusting voters to make appropriate decisions? And the flag-burning amendment is a solution in search of a problem. Our danger lies not in the burning of our flag, but when the time comes that thousands cheer its burning. It's far better to spend our efforts building a strong and compassionate nation where there is little need nor desire to burn the American flag. And the question of abortion rights may deeply divide our nation, but I have never heard anyone say, "I like abortion." It is the ultimate and painful choice of those who face irreconcilable conflict. It is far better for us to join as a people to strengthen families, teach our children about sex and love, and open broadly opportunities for adoption. Those actions will do far more to end abortion than the hate and violence of political conflict. And a strong federal system. More than 2 centuries ago, 13 fiercely independent states joined together for their common good. 4 generations struggled for the reality of nationhood, but the Civil War finally defined the United States. Noted historian Shelby Foote said it well, before the Civil War, the United States were. After the Civil War, the United States is. From a collection of states, we now truly became a nation. Now our federal system emerged with defined roles for local, state, and national government. But for the past century, the federal government has spread its influence into virtually every facet of public authority, creating our current chaotic system. Overlap, conflict, and waste harass taxpayers daily. I co-chaired a national commission on our federal system with then-Governor Charles Robb of Virginia. The report was titled, "To Form a More Perfect Union," and it recommended returning hundreds of federal programs to state and local control. In turn, our national government would assume the cost of public assistance and health care, a national safety net for our people. It was essentially a financial even trade, but eliminating duplication created huge opportunities for savings. Responsibility for national defense, international relations, a comprehensive domestic safety net for our citizens, and constitutional protection of our freedoms are clearly national responsibilities. But I believe strongly in reducing the sweep of federal control by creating active, smart, able state and local governments who are prepared to meet citizen needs. You know, states are frequently the laboratories of democracy. Most major new federal domestic programs evolved out of initiatives first developed at state and local levels. And fourth, fiscal integrity. It's not encompassed in the infamous words of George H.W. Bush, "Read my lips, no new taxes." Rather, it arises from attempting to define the real needs of our citizens and finding the most efficient and effective ways to meet those needs. The constant challenge is to find the right balance between spending and taxes, just as a business tries to discover the right balance between prices and profits. Profligate spending and irrational prices lead to disaster, but sometimes taxes and sometimes prices need to be raised. Fiscal responsibility means paying for the benefits we receive. Anything less is borrowing from our grandchildren for the benefits we want but are not courageous enough to pay for. So, conservation, Constitution, strong federal system, fiscal integrity, those define my view of a Republican Party that could be successful and that deserves to govern. Well, I'm frequently asked, how can you still be a Republican? It's easy. I don't believe in quitting. And ask Nancy. I will continue to fight for these principles because I believe they are right for America, but not all good ideas come from one side of the political aisle. In my inaugural address as governor, I said, I am not afraid of the word liberal, and I am not ashamed of the word conservative. And in a later inaugural address, I stated I would rather cross the aisle than cross the people. We may disagree as political parties, but we all share a love of this country. Laboring together for the common good is not weakness, but it is a strength beyond political division. I've never seen a Democratic salmon or a Republican highway, but I have seen lots of landmark bipartisan legislation. Some may say, okay, these are great principles. How do you translate them into action? Well, if I were, forget about it. Here are 4 examples I would propose. The Congress should adopt the 2-year budget. In the first year of a new Congress, propose new initiatives. Build a 2-year budget plan. In the second year, review current laws, repeal obsolete statutes, challenge budget priorities, and streamline public services. Congress enjoys giving birth to new laws, but seldom ever reviews its progeny, and it's time they did so. Second, it's time to fix Social Security. The coming crisis was apparent 25 years ago. When baby boomers retire in the early 21st century, the surplus in the Social Security system quickly vanishes. That slide toward bankruptcy started this year, when we began to pay out more than we receive in taxes. 25 years ago, the fix was easy. Today, it is tougher, but an increase of relatively few months over time in the retirement age, coupled with a modest increase in wages taxed, would repair our system for many years. Our new health care system misses the biggest opportunity for savings in health care. Recent national research measured cost of treatment for common diseases coupled with outcome measurements. Seattle and the whole northwest quarter of our country are good examples of efficient treatment and good outcomes. If all our nation treated common diseases with similar efficiency and effectiveness, we could cut medical costs by many billions of dollars and be just as healthy. We struggle with energy policies that show little courage and less urgency. Our nation needs to set comprehensive energy goals with the same fervor that President John Kennedy used when he declared, "We will put a man on the moon in this decade." And in the 9th year of that decade, we did. A successful energy policy returns huge rewards to our environment, to our economy, and to our international security. Well, will any of these ideas succeed? Only if voters hear them clearly above the incessant squawks of protectors of the status quo, the din of misleading political advertising, and the endless debates of Congress. For our nation's sake, I hope that our young have good ears, good ideas, and a thirst for public service. Thank you.
We do have time for a few questions. Anybody like Mr. Kraft?
Dan, when you were governor, you had the courage to propose an income tax as being a better way to move forward. I understand that isn't your viewpoint now. Care to comment on both sides of that?
Sure. No, what I proposed in 1970 and again in 1973 was not an income tax. It was tax reform, of which income tax was a part. There's a big difference. We proposed a change in our tax system to make it both more productive and more fair, but it included significant constitutional protections. It was constitutional. We even got 80% of the legislature from both parties to endorse it. and put it on the ballot. The only trouble is we lost from the people's vote 2.5 to 1. But that's the big difference. When you try to do it as they're doing it now, it is just an income tax. It is a tax increase. It is not constitutionally protected. And it's certainly wide open to extension, which may or may not be bad, but better watch out. Because, it's said by some of the proponents that, well, it requires a vote if you extend that tax. And, if you vote for this, you voted for a tax because you don't think you're going to get taxed. It's like Russell Long, who was the chairman of the Finance Committee for the Senate, who had a little ditty saying, "Don't tax you, don't tax me, tax the fellow behind the tree." And the next time more money is needed, you don't think they're going to tax everybody. They'll tax the next 2% or the next 3%. And people will vote for it and say, "I'm not going to get taxed." And pretty soon, you'll have enough of them being taxed so when you go for the next unit, all those who are being taxed will say, "Heck yes, invite them in." So
Dan, we have a question
I
from
think if we're
Lynn.
going to do this, do it with some constitutional protections.
Thank you. After today, I might be one of those Dan Invis Democrats. But recent demographic information is saying that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. Do you have any policy ideas around that?
Well, I don't think by taxing one group to make them poorer is going to make the other group richer. I think what we have got to do is to rebuild an economy. Has been, we have been in excess, and all of us are partially responsible. We have spent too much, both in government and personally. We have not been careful enough in husbanding our resources. We have not set out on the kind of long-term policies, many of which I mentioned today. And I think we better start there. Start to rebuild an economy that's an investment economy, one that allows us to build new jobs instead of just a consumer economy based on spending. But it's not going to be easy, and I don't think anybody has any magic answers, and it's not likely to happen very quickly. In the meantime, we've got troubles in River City.
Governor, in your last year as governor, 1976, Evans Wyckoff and Frank Warnke and I co-chaired a series of hearings around the state on economic development and regulatory reform. Dixie Lee Ray ran on the proposals that came out of that, then dropped them like a hot rock in face of public employee opposition. How would you suggest we address this growing gap between the public and private sector?
Well, I think we've got to, you better start with people, voters, all of us, paying a lot more attention to what's going on in the public sector. It happens lots of times simply because people don't pay enough attention. They don't vote enough. They don't seek out the really good people to run for public office. And when running a business or an enterprise, won't even encourage some to run for public office. I think that public office ought to be held in very high regard, not necessarily current public officials held in high regard, but there's a big difference. If we don't hold public service in high regard, not just for somebody else, but for all of us, then we are going to suffer by over-regulation and all of the kinds of things that grow with a government and people not paying enough attention. I think that's really where you start. When you only have 60% of the people voting, you've got 40% who are saying, "I don't care." And that's dangerous.
Jim, you have a question?
I do. Governor, would you please comment on the growing use of the initiative process as part of the democratic process? What's your view on that?
10 seconds or less.
Yeah, I can't do it in 10 seconds or less, but we have come a long way from this being a citizen's outlet for doing things that the legislative process can't accomplish, and has become a focus for big interest to get something they want that they didn't get through the legislature, or that the legislature may have gone in a different direction. All you have to look is the current election, and there's almost no individual citizen donations to any of the initiatives. It's all very big money, and that's very dangerous. If I had my choice, I would require initiatives to be all initiatives to the legislature, which is a process we do have, so that you could get the signatures, then send the proposal to the legislature, let them either perfect it or say we don't want anything to do with it and send it on to the people for their vote, or put up an alternative that they think is better and let people vote on the alternatives. That makes a lot more sense than continuing this distorted kind of system we've got now.
Thank you.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible in part by a grant from First Choice Health, working with the Washington Health Information Collaborative to use technology to bring better health care to patients throughout the Pacific Northwest. First Choice Health,